And while the presentation will be about the oceans globally, I will be highlighting a Pacific perspective, because what's happening in the Pacific anyway reflects the nature of what's critical to the rest of the planet. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so the oceans. So that's the Pacific Ocean, and you can see, get a sense in that image of the vastness of the ocean. Gee, let me see. Okay. And there you see the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans. So it gives us a sense of how much of our planet is covered by the oceans. Without the oceans, our planet would be as inhospitable as Mars. No meadows, no forests, no birds, no animals, and no humans. So life began in the oceans 3.8 billion years ago and evolved and was nurtured there for more than 3 billion years before it began to colonize the land. And life came ashore. It brought water with it, so that water makes up more than 70% of all living things, living beings, including us. So the ocean, we can think of the ocean as the creator and sustainer of all life. We still have salt in our blood, actually, so that our connection to the oceans continues to exist. Earth is the only planet we know of in our solar system comprised predominantly of water. But we know more about the universe now than we know about the oceans, and especially the deep oceans. All right, so here's a bit more about the oceans. It hosts the greatest diversity of life and ecosystems on planet Earth, make up 70% of the planet, contribute at least 50% of our oxygen, and control the temperature and humidity in the atmosphere, and play a critical role in regulating the climate and the health, of course, of all the marvellous forms of marine diversity. Here's a special thing that we now are hearing about, the oceans globally, what's happening to our coral reefs globally. So coral reefs, account for only 0.1% of the surface area of the ocean, yet they support a quarter of Earth's known marine life. Protect shorelines. They're critical to 500 million people in island and coastal communities, for whom they provide food, jobs, coastal defences. And of course, in countries like Australia and the US, they're also a focus for tourism, for leisure, and their aesthetic beauty. So that's the wonder of reefs. Now I'm going to move to some things about people and oceans. All right. So critical to the livelihoods of the 3 billion coastal and island peoples on our planet. And UNESCO identifies some of the critical functions they provide for everybody. Source of food, energy, minerals, medications. Regulation of the climate. Host of the greatest diversity of life and ecosystems on planet Earth. I mentioned that before. And provider of economic, social, and aesthetic services. Now I'm going to say a little bit about oceans and Pacific peoples. Giving that example, of course, it applies also to Indian Ocean and Caribbean peoples. So this is one of the ways that the Pacific is often presented, with those kind of lines showing the areas of the countries. And you'll notice from that map, in a lot of cases, you can barely see that the countries themselves exist. But this is a new vision of the Pacific, showing the exclusive economic zones that are created under the law of the sea. And it gives you a totally different perspective. And so the people in the Pacific now say, we belong to the blue Pacific continent. We live in an ocean continent. You might live in Australia on a land continent. We live in an ocean continent. That's very, very critical to Pacific identity. For many coastal and small island peoples, the ocean is part of the daily living space. Men go out fishing, women collecting shellfish and seaweed near the shore, providing for daily needs and in some cases goods for trading with others. The ocean also features in ceremonial dress and performances, reenacting people's founding stories, a focus of cultural and spiritual identity. In some parts of Micronesia, maritime knowledge based on the experience of currents, clouds, stars, and bird and fish life is equivalent to radar. Now, I'm going to just show a few examples. That's from Bougainville. So that's a family just going on a daily journey between points, either on their own island or between atolls, carrying their goods there in the basket. This one is a navigation map. Now, I have to make a confession about this. I learned about these kind of navigation maps from the Marshall Islands. I was just mentioning before that in Micronesia, they have knowledge based on radar, and that knowledge is translated into maps like this for navigation. However, last year, we had a special exhibition in the Queensland Art Gallery of Torres Strait items, precious items from Torres Strait, and I discovered that is actually a Torres Strait navigation map. So that kind of knowledge, whether it was ever passed on between peoples, when you think of the thousands of kilometres between the Torres Strait and the Marshall Islands, is quite amazing. Okay, here's women shellfish or some other near the shore in the Pacific. And I thought I'd show you that one. That's in Tuvalu. And it gives you a sense of the fragility of life for people who live in atoll countries like Tuvalu and Kiribati and Marshall Islands. Okay, all right. So now we're going to look at some of the ocean changes and threats. And this year's, last year's World Oceans Day, the theme was Planet Ocean Tides Are Changing. So the ocean is experiencing intense impacts of the three major and interrelated environmental challenges of our time. So here they are: climate change, pollution, and loss of biodiversity, and they're all interrelated. Okay, so spaces like the ocean, relatively normal for hundreds of thousands of years, are changing so rapidly that creatures and ecosystems can't cope. Scientists tell us that since 1971, the ocean has absorbed heat energy equivalent to the energy of more than 25 billion Hiroshima-scale atomic bombs. 90% of human-created global warming goes to the oceans. And in the past year, ocean surface temperatures reached the highest level ever recorded. So you probably would have seen that information has been coming out regularly about how the level of ocean temperatures. And according to the World Meteorological Organization, we've broken all the records. Okay, so now we'll have a look at some of the climate change impacts on ocean warming, acidification, and so on. Okay, so here we go. So what are some of the impacts? Sea level rise and land erosion. There was a story the other day about Tuvalu at the moment, where there's been a king tide, and the seawater has washed down their main street of their capital city. So you can imagine what it's done to houses and people's gardens. More frequent and more extreme droughts, floods, cyclones, hurricanes, marine heat waves, and other extreme weather events. And we're hearing about those now almost on a daily basis somewhere in the world. The latest one that came out was in Dubai. I think you probably saw some news about that, and adjacent countries, how many people were drowned and so on. So impacts on marine ecosystems, including coral reefs and migratory fish stocks, mass deaths of fish, seabirds, and large sea creatures. And the slowing of deep ocean currents, so less cold, deep ocean water pushing north. And that will change too with what's happening in the Antarctic. So there's a thing called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current that affects the temperature of the ocean in the Northern Hemisphere. And so that's what will change if there's not enough deep ocean water pushing north. And if it stops flowing, it will freeze Europe, scorch the tropics, and increase sea level rise in the North Atlantic. Okay. So one critical outcome of climate change impacts is the death and forced displacement of human populations, or our destitution, loss of sovereignty and cultural identity. And I'll come back to that later in the presentation. So here are a few examples of how climate change is impacting the Pacific. Now, I showed you a few minutes ago a slide of Tuvalu. This is also taken on the main island of Tuvalu. And you can see the ocean on one side and the lagoon on the other side, which is a normal pattern in atoll countries. But you can see how fragile that is. That's the main road going down the middle. Mm. And that's why when, last week or a few days ago, they had that road flooded with seawater. I think that was in the Marshall Islands. That's seawater. At the time of possibly a cyclone and a combination with king tides, an extreme weather event of some kind. This is taken in Bougainville. You can see there the food trees being eroded from the shoreline and falling into the ocean. I'm not sure where that is actually, but it just shows you the intensity of some of those extreme weather events and the impacts it has on people's shorelines. I have a friend here from Kiribati, Juanita, and some years ago she talked about being home on a visit. And while they were sitting eating breakfast, the sea washed in through the kitchen window. And in 2021, Canada experienced a heat dome off its Pacific coast, estimated to have killed 1 billion marine animals. So those are just some of the incredible impacts of climate change in oceans. Okay. And of course, some of those tipping points are very abrupt. People are not ready for them. They don't get enough warning. They're uncontrollable, irreversible, and sometimes absolutely catastrophic. Okay, so now I'm going to move to another aspect of what's happening to the oceans. Oh, sorry, I missed that slide. That's a cemetery in the Marshall Islands. And as far as I'm aware, some of the cemeteries in the Torres Strait are also under threat. And I'm sure in many other places as well, especially in coastal communities. Okay. All right, so ocean exploitation, increasing reference to the importance of the blue economy, regarding the ocean fundamentally as a place for industrial scale extraction of resources for human goods and services. So industrial scale fishing, scooping up huge catches of fish. And I remember reading about one of those cases off the coast of West Africa, where they have these huge factory ships out of the coast, scooping up the fish, and the local communities who go out in small boats to catch their daily food haven't got a hope anymore of catching anything. Then the extraction of pharmaceutical resources. I don't know a lot about that, but you know, it's another area where people are making money out of the ocean. Then deep seabed mining, and I'll come back to that later in the presentation. That's another contemporary critical issue for the oceans. Okay, now I'm going to move to the thing of ocean pollution. Okay. So it's like humans treating the ocean as a big garbage dump. The UN Environment Programme identifies 3 major sources of ocean pollution. So first of all, the pharmaceutical industry, medications, vitamins, cleaners, disinfectants, beauty products. And again, I don't know exactly the background of that, but that information is available if you need to check it out. And then agriculture and manufacturing industries, and the runoff from those causing ocean pollution. And there's been a huge development of chemicals since the 1960s. If you're interested, you might like to look up a book that just came out at the end of last year called Earth Detox, written by a former CSIRO Australian scientist. I've got his name here somewhere. I can give it to you later. Anyway, it's one of the scariest things I've ever read about what's happening now with chemicals in our world, to ourselves and to everything else around us. And then plastic and other waste, which we hear a lot about, and that's a special theme for this year's Earth Day. Okay, so here's an example of plastic pollution. Yeah. Even in countries with advanced waste management systems, only a small percentage of plastic waste is properly recycled. And we know what happened in Australia last year, and you know how just a minute amount of this kind of plastic is recycled in Australia. And we have to wonder when something serious is going to happen about it.
It's the salad in the fridge, Ben.
Yeah, I saw that.
So, and you probably heard about the Pacific Garbage Patch. That's not it, but it's a huge collection of plastic that's out in the Pacific Ocean, and that, you know, the impact that it's having on all the ocean creatures. Okay. Yeah, where? Oh, I forgot to mention, I haven't got it in the presentation. One of the other sources of ocean pollution, of course, is the radioactive chemicals from the nuclear testing that Britain, France, and the US did in the 1950s, between the 1950s and the 1990s. Okay. All right. So here's some other sources of ocean pollution: shipping, transportation of goods, cruise liners, equipment from commercial fishing, those huge gill nets and other items that are used for commercial fishing. And of course, not to mention the amount of catch that gets just destroyed and chucked back into the ocean. Oil and gas exploitation, and the military, huge ocean-going transports and unknown numbers of submarines conducting military exercises, weapons testing, dumping of military equipment, and space junk. Now, just to mention a couple of things in that regard, at the end of World War II, or during and at the end of World War II, a huge amount of military items were either destroyed or just dumped in the Pacific. And these are now having an impact on Pacific peoples, the pollution that they're still causing in people's backyards in the Pacific. Regarding the oil and gas exploitation, you will have heard, and maybe some of you saw Tim Winton's TV programs about the plan for Woodside to mine for gas in the area of the incredibly important Ningaloo Reef off the coast of Western Australia. And so ignoring the ocean and underwater heritage rights of the Indigenous peoples of that area as well. And that's happened off the north of Australia as well. And there's currently a proposal for a huge oil and gas exploration project by a multinational company called TGS in an area extending from Tasmania all the way along Victoria's coast to South Australia, starting with seismic blasting. So it's not difficult to imagine the impact that is going to have on the ocean and on marine life in that area. So all these have a huge impact on marine life and biodiversity. Okay, now I'm coming to the action side of things and what's happening now, the challenges for ocean protection and restoration. Okay, so the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea was put in place in 1982 and remains the main international regime for the world's oceans, governing the uses of the oceans and their resources. That's not so long ago, really. And when I showed you the map before of the economic zones, it's that convention that covers the 12-mile economic zones around that countries have the right to as part of their sovereignty. Okay. All right. So it lays down, yes, okay. There we go. So there's that map again showing the exclusive economic zones that have been allocated to nations through that UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Now, one of the things that's been raised in the Pacific is, okay, what happens when our land shrinks because of climate change, because of sea level rise? Do our ocean boundaries shrink? And so there's a move to advocate among the Pacific nations to keep the economic zones as they are at present and not to be shifted when their land starts to disappear. Okay, so UNCLOS upholds the right to use and exploit, but the requirement to protect and restore are only now being followed up, actually. Okay, so I think we would have all heard about the Sustainable Development Goals that were agreed by the United Nations in 2015 and go from 2015 to 2030. And one of those, goal number 14, is called Life Below Water. And it calls on countries to reduce marine pollution, to protect marine ecosystems, and respect international law that calls for the safe and sustainable use of the ocean and its resources. Now, I'm going to show you a quote from Laudato Si. This is Laudato Si. Oh, I don't think I put the, oh yeah, the number is in there. Okay. So let us make a system of governance of the oceans. International and regional conventions do exist, but fragmentation and the lack of strict mechanisms of regulation, control, and penalisation end up undermining these efforts. So that's the critical thing about any of these new ocean agreements that I'm going to be sharing with you. I think the lack of strict mechanisms of regulation, control, and penalisation. And when you think about the maps we looked at the beginning of the huge extent of the ocean, 70% of the planet, you can imagine the challenges involved in those mechanisms of regulation. What is needed, in effect, is an agreement on systems of governance for the whole range of so-called global commons. So that's Laudato Si. Okay, now, the Third World Ocean Conference on Oceans was held in mid-2022. Now, since that UNCLOS was set up in 1982, there have only been two other ocean conferences since that time. And so it's trying to find a way to implement that convention, recognise the urgent need to conserve 30% of the oceans in order to prevent a complete breakdown of ocean life. So this is what the ocean conferences are trying to do now. To protect 30% of the deep ocean, yes, the ocean outside national jurisdiction. But, you know, it's not difficult to imagine the challenge that governments face trying to do that the international community as a whole faces trying to do that. When you think of the size of the ocean and when you think of the push for economic exploitation of all planetary resources. Okay, so the next ocean conference is going to be in France in 2025. In preparation for that conference in 2022, the Pacific country of Palau organised a conference for itself. There were some other visitors from other Pacific countries and the US as well. Palau, across the north of the Pacific, you have the Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, and Palau. And Palau is the closest country to the Philippines. but it's in the Pacific. So they're passionate about the ocean, and this is what they called their conference: our ocean, our people, our prosperity. So these were the issues: combating climate change, promoting sustainable fisheries, advancing marine protected areas, confronting pollution, and so on. So trying to pick up all those main themes of what's needed to achieve a safe and secure ocean, especially for people whose lives depend so much on the oceans. Okay. Now, another relevant item in this regard is the UN Biodiversity Conference. It was held, it's the 15th of those conferences on biodiversity. We don't hear that much about them, really. It was held in Montreal, Canada, in December 2022, and resulted in the adoption of what's called the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to address biodiversity loss, restore ecosystems, and protect Indigenous rights. Now, this is for the entire planet, so land and waters and ocean. But I put it in there because they included the 30% includes the ocean. So it aims to address biodiversity loss, restore ecosystems, and protect Indigenous rights. Concrete measures to halt and reverse nature loss, including 30% of the planet and 30% of degraded ecosystems under protection by 2030. So a huge challenge, really. And again, how is it going to happen? Who's going to make it happen? There are, of course, organisations passionately involved in this kind of work, but it's an enormous challenge. Okay, now the next couple of slides are about another proposed treaty. And this one is called, in common language, the High Seas Treaty. Again, it's about biodiversity. So in March 2023, the High Seas Treaty framework agreement was reached for the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. Okay, so in other words, the high seas, what I mentioned before, the seas that come outside the national economic zones. So beyond national jurisdiction. So more than 60% of the world's oceans. And only about 1% is currently protected. There are some cases of it. So the aim is to ensure again by 2030 that 30% of the high seas are designated protected areas. So it's sometimes called the High Seas Treaty. Now here's a little bit more about it. Focuses on protection of biodiversity, stopping pollution, and stopping the overuse of resources. A legal framework to allow countries to designate certain international waters as protected areas for marine life, if agreed by consensus. And that would be a significant move. The preamble states the desire of treaty partners to act as stewards of the ocean in areas beyond national jurisdiction on behalf of present and future generations by protecting, caring for, and ensuring responsible use of the marine environment. Now, that treaty took 10 years of negotiations, actually, and 2 full weeks of a marathon non-stop talks to get to that point. And before they reached that agreement. Okay. So on the 19th of July last year, all 193 UN member states agreed to the treaty. Includes rules for environmental impact assessments for commercial activities, and will create a new body to oversee the process. Establishes principles for sharing marine genetic resources, not just so that the resources are not just scooped up by rich companies in rich countries. And the treaty opened for signatures at the 2023 UN General Assembly on the 30th of September last year. Now, you'll be interested to see who has signed that treaty. So I didn't have the chance to look it up again, but the last time I looked, 76 countries had signed the treaty. Now, I think for the treaty to come into force, there have to be half of the UN member states, or it might be 50. So anyway, there you can see the countries in our region that have signed the treaty, including Australia. And I think it's good to know that Australia has signed that treaty. And, you know, that's for the high seas. Whether Australia is strong enough in protecting the areas within our economic zones is another question. Okay. All right. So there's also now a so-called UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development that has an impetus from scientists themselves who are concerned about ocean life. And the first conference has just been held in Barcelona. And the mission of that group is to improve ocean health and marine biodiversity, including ways to better protect the seabed in order to avoid the danger of releasing stores of carbon. Now, I'm going to talk about the ocean seabed and its protection a little bit later. But I'm coming back for a moment to the whole issue of plastic, which is an increasingly huge pollution issue, even in countries with advanced waste management systems. So there's now a move for a global plastic treaty, an international treaty to end plastic pollution. And UNESCO, the UN Environment, Social and Cultural Organization, is leading this move. And they're hoping to get it by the end of this year. An international treaty to end plastic pollution is a huge, huge, huge challenge. Aiming to be international, legally binding, and include a just transition for waste pickers. Those are the people who support their families by picking through mountains of waste. You know, a lot of these in African countries, partly because huge amounts of waste, including medical waste, from rich countries, so Europe, the USA, Canada, Australia, huge amounts of waste are shipped overseas to other people's backyards, including plastic waste and including medical waste, actually. So then you have waste pickers who use that opportunity to feed their families by picking through whatever might be useful from that rubbish and somehow using it locally to earn an income. Okay, so the expectation is that there will be strong resistance by petrochemical companies. And I think, you know, you just have to think about walking into a Coles or a Woolworths supermarket in Australia to realise the huge influence of petrochemical companies. The amount of plastic goods cover, not just plastic bags, but so much of furniture as well. The amount of plastic now in our lives is just incredible. And I now live in a neighbourhood where it's quite close to a big shopping centre, and my neighbourhood is now trashed with plastic all over the place. Okay, so you might find the same. So there we go. There's going to be a new round of global talks next week about the plastic treaty. And the people in the Arctic are very keen to focus on microplastics. If you ever get the chance to read that book, and it's in our libraries that I mentioned, Earth Detox, what he has to say about microplastic and what it's doing already in our bodies is quite scary. And we're getting it from, plastic drink bottles from from the air, from all kinds of sources. And the peoples of the Arctic want to focus on micro and nanoplastics because it's invading their ocean and air spaces, and they have absolutely nothing to do with it or contribute towards it. Okay. All right. Now I'm moving on to what I mentioned earlier about deep seabed mining. So for several years, there have been moves to mine the deep ocean for the minerals we need for new energy technology. Exploration for some years by a Canadian company has already happened in Papua New Guinea off New Ireland. And the issue is being negotiated through the International Seabed Authority. And there's a strong Pacific group advocating to stop, for at least a moratorium on this until proper rules can be put in place. And 3 Pacific Island nations have expressed interest in allowing this to happen within their ocean areas. So this is what happens. Enormous remotely operated electric bulldozers are being designed to crawl the seafloor and sweep up the mineral-rich nodules on the ocean floor, trampling everything and kicking up muddy clouds that would hang in the ocean for eons. Delicate animals unable to swim away would be smothered and choked. That's one description of it. The other thing, of course, is that there's a huge amount of carbon stored in the ocean seabed, and that will be mined up as well or allowed to emerge into the ocean if that kind of seabed mining goes ahead. Okay. This is what critics say about the idea. It's gambling with the health of the ocean, a strong agreement in the scientific community that knowledge of the ocean deeps and their life forms is still extremely limited, and the intensity and methods of such activities could remove entire habitats and wipe out species we don't even know about. So there's a group of international parliamentarians in a movement for a moratorium on seabed mining, deep seabed mining, with signatories from 33 countries. And this is what the Pacific parliamentarians who are very much against this have said. The ocean is the living blue heart of our planet. Not only our common heritage, but also our common responsibility. We are its guardians. We recognise its significance and its essence as the basis of our Pacific identity and well-being. we are the ocean. In its preservation, we are preserved. So that's, I think, a very, very deep and moving statement from Pacific parliamentarians about that new endeavour. Okay. Nearly finished. And I thought that it would be useful to just mention the whole issue of climate change displacement, since we've heard about it from Pacific peoples now for more than 30 years. Okay, so there are efforts now to establish legal protection for island peoples forced to abandon their entire national homelands because of now irreversible sea level rise happening faster than scientists anticipated. So that's the good news in a bad situation. And the need for comprehensive approaches to relocation. And then, of course, the issue of sovereignty over abandoned homelands. Now, you may have heard a few things about Tuvalu in relation to this. I think it was back in 2009 that our former Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, said to the people of Tuvalu, well, you know, if you lose your land, you can come to Australia and then you can give us sovereignty over that part of the ocean where you once lived. And the people of Tuvalu said, no, thanks very much, not interested. But anyway, a new move happened at last year's Pacific Islands Forum meeting. Anthony Albanese, with the Minister for Defence Industry and the Pacific, Pat Conroy, negotiated with the then President of Tuvalu what's called the Thalapili Union Treaty between Tuvalu and Australia. And part of it says that Australia will allow 240 Tuvaluans to come to Australia each year with the potential of national identity. And part of the agreement is that Tuvalu will regard Australia as its major security partner and not allow any other country, you know, of course with China in mind, to take on that role. In the meantime, so I think about 2 or 3 years ago, the then Foreign Minister of Tuvalu set up an online identity for Tuvalu, with the idea of maintaining that identity at least in the cloud if the people lose their land. Okay. Now, let's see. Okay, so I thought I'd just conclude with a couple of positive initiatives that are happening. Okay, so here we are. Leaders of 9 small island states, including Vanuatu, Palau, Cook Islands, and Niue, approached the UN Maritime Court in September 2023 to seek protection of the world's oceans from catastrophic climate change. Their aim is to clarify the obligation of states to protect the marine environment in terms of legally binding obligations. So the Pacific nations are trying to find every which way they can, by whatever means, to protect themselves from what they see as a looming future. And you may have heard also, in an effort inspired by Pacific students and initiated by the government of Vanuatu. An approach has been made for a judgment from the International Court of Justice on climate change, and who's responsible and what are the legal obligations. So that will take some time to happen. Submissions, the first, well, it was passed by the UN General Assembly last year, and so it went ahead to the International Court of Justice, and it's probably will take quite a while for anything to come out of it, but there were initial submissions were accepted in the first few months of this year. I think they closed in March. So the process is on the way. Of course, whether the highly polluting nations will take any notice of such a judgment is always the question. Okay. All right. I just thought I'd mention this at the end. The Rights of Nature movement, which you may have heard about, calling for legal protection for nature. Panama, the first country to extend this legal right to the ocean off their country. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, the Wanganui River now has a special legal right to protection, and call for a universal declaration of ocean rights by 2030. So those initiatives are underway. One of the things that I mentioned in the reflection at the beginning about whales and how the Creator is imagined to be enjoying the movement of whales in the ocean. Well, a special thing has happened just, I think it was last week, initiated by some Maori leaders, and they invited some other Polynesian people to the meeting. So from Hawaii, from Tonga, and from Rapa Nui, that we used to call it Easter Island, and somewhere else, I forget exactly with the fifth country. And they have now allocated personhood to whales, recognising the place whales take in their mythology and their stories of origin. So I thought that was an interesting thing to share. Okay. Thank you. That's the last slide.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you so much for all of that. There's just so much to hold in our hearts and minds. So we thought we would just take a short amount of time to touch in with the people in our short breakout rooms. And I'm wondering if what we could think of and share with each other is like what from what you've heard is your greatest concern, and what are your hopes? There were some positive things. So we'll just go into those rooms for around 7 minutes and then come back and have some conversation if there are any questions that you would like to ask of Wendy too. So enjoy your conversations. You might need to press join to join the different groups. Sorry, Chris, I think it's just you and me in this room. I was getting confused about what was happening. Oh, Anne-Marie's there somewhere, but she's and Mark are there somewhere too. But I think I can hear Mark in another group. Can you hear me, Chris? Welcome back, people who have come back.
Recording in progress.
So, any comments, questions from your group that you'd like to share?
From your group.
Now, if you're not speaking, you might need to mute because we're getting some echoing. Thanks, Peter. Peter, is that your hand up? I can see. No, it was you. Did you want to make a comment?
Myself.
You might have been scratching your head, Peter. I thought you had your hand up.
That's right. Okay, well, I mean, in terms of greatest concerns, I mean, the thing that bothers me greatly is the mega ships that go vacuuming up the ocean floor. And as far as regulations being in place, my question is how are regulations actually enforced in respect to those, huge.
Thanks, Peter. Great question. Wendy, do you have any response to that?
Well, this is being negotiated through the International Seabed Authority, and there are some nations pushing for it and others, they're trying to call for a moratorium. There's quite a few European countries are already calling for a moratorium as well. Now, what was I going to say? Something. I've lost the plot. Sorry.
No, that's all right. We might come back to it. Carolyn, you have a comment you'd like to make.
Thanks very much, Wendy. And I'm sorry I missed the very beginning of your talk. I really appreciate it. But yeah, I'm a Mercy sister as well, and I work in with the Columban missionaries in the Peace, Ecology and Justice Office. And the Columbans were part of the UN Oceans Conference in Lisbon, Wendy, and there was a Talanoa there. Archbishop Peter Lloyd Chong was present as well. And also with COP15, we put in a submission around that, and just sort of finding there's so much more need to get the word out about biodiversity in general. So this is all very positive, and thank you so much. Just on the COP15, there was a Faith for COP15. It was called. It's a multi-faith coalition, and from that has grown. It's now called Faith for Biodiversity. And they're sort of working actively. We have a connection with them on the, the Kunming-Montreal agreement.
Right.
Ongoing. It's an ongoing coalition, working on the thing. So leading up to the next COP16 later this year. Yeah.
That's good, Carolyn. Thanks for letting us know for some of the things that are happening. And for your information, we have actually recorded this session. So at some stage it will go on. It usually takes us a couple of weeks to get it up onto our website, but it will be up on our website, the CCJP website. Any comments or questions from anyone else, any of the other groups?
Well, I have one. And
Marilyn, thanks, Marilyn.
what I'm concerned about is at Millmerran in the Darling Downs, west in the middle of Queensland, a mining company is mining at Millmerran, and they want to put the CO2 wastewater into the Great Artesian Basin. And that, to me, is just a no-goer. One interviewer on the radio said, well, if the stuff is so good, why don't you sell it to a drink factory to make soft drink out of it? But it's poisonous and they want to put it in the Great Artesian Basin. That is bothering me a lot.
Yes, it's been an ongoing concern, I think, for any of us that have been following this, Marilyn. It's a different part of an ocean, isn't it? It's our whole underground Artesian Basin. Yes.
So many people won't survive in this land if that water is poisoned with the waste from the mine.
That's right. And not only the humans, but all the other life forms as well. Yes. Marilyn, there are some strong groups now active on this issue. In fact, just before the presentation, I came from a meeting at Parliament House in Brisbane. It was called by the Premier for groups that have been working on environmental concerns, and in particular, a group of us who lobbied hard to get the Queensland government to protect the Channel Country from mining. So,
thanks, Wendy. Marilyn's, sorry, Wendy. Sorry, Wendy.
Yeah, so anyway, but so now that issue of pumping anything into the Artesian Basin like that will be taken up in a big way, I'm sure, by the same groups, Marilyn.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Thank you, Wendy.
And Marilyn's there in Brisbane, so Marilyn, you might like to join in, get in touch with Wendy.
I just remembered what I was going to say about the deep sea mining. There is a small group in Australia now following this issue, and if anyone in particular would like to connect with that group, I'm happy to put you in touch with them. Just get in touch with me.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Wendy.
Wendy, and if you send that information to us, I'm sure that Cecily will make sure it goes up on our webpage too.
Yes, okay.
Great. Thanks, Wendy. Any other comments or questions or something from your group, Mark, and then Chris?
Wendy, I was interested in the I'm not sure what the treaty was, but the 193 United Nations member states signed, including Australia in 2023.
That was the High Seas Treaty.
The High Sea, all right, I've got it underneath that, so that's what it was, good.
BBNJ, yes.
Yeah, so who was pushing for that within our nation? I mean,
I can't tell you that, yes.
Parliamentary, I mean, is there anyone who is a leader in pushing these things, particularly for the Pacific area, in our political system that you know of?
Yes, I'm trying to think of that. There would be some. I think Tanya Plibersek is pretty good on a lot of things, but she's, she's a bit at the mercy of some of the stronger voices in the political arena, as we see happening now with the watering down of some of our environmental laws that's taking place. Yeah. So
on from that, Wendy, my understanding is that you also have to, the Parliament then has to pass legislation that signing the treaty is only the first step.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Signing the treaty and then that, has to pass legislation. It has to be ratified. Yes, so there's a long process involved. Some of the Teal candidates in the Parliament are passionate about environmental issues, Margaret. I think they're worth connecting with if you've got any there in your neighbourhood.
Yeah.
Thanks. Now, Chris, you had a question or a comment?
Yes, what I was thinking of here was the way in which the Antarctic Treaty has worked. That the Antarctic was put under the authority of a world body,
Yes.
and that meant that anybody who was going to be doing anything there had to get that approval. The High Seas Treaty seems to offer that possibility, but I don't think it's anywhere near strong enough as it amounts at the moment, because I'm gathering that there are a few, you might call them rogue efforts, where national governments are giving approval for areas outside their own economic zone to be taking, for example, deep sea mining, taking manganese modules. And so it may be that there is a need to declare that the high seas area is under the jurisdiction of world body. Could that be?
Yes.
Yeah. Can that come out of strengthening the High Seas Treaty at the
Yes,
present time?
but at the moment they're only going for 30% protection, Chris. You know, the Antarctic is a very specific area,
Yes.
and you know, geographically so much smaller than the high seas. So it's probably going to be harder to get you know, regulation of that area. I don't know which 30% they're looking at to protect. But yes, a lot of these things are just beginning, and I'm just glad that something's happening, but we have to find ways to keep pressing. And as where is she? Carol, Carolyn, was it? Who
Yes,
talked
yes.
about, you know, the participation. Yes, Carolyn's mention of participating in some of those conferences and developing a Faiths for Biodiversity group. This, you know, it's groups like that that are going to have to keep pushing and pushing to get a real outcome for some of those treaties.
Thanks, Wendy and Chris. Any other comments or questions from people? Thanks, Mari.
I just can, listening to all of this, you sort of suddenly become aware of how all the systems are sort of playing on each other. So when you mentioned that last thing, which I thought was quite disturbing about that machine being developed for the bottom of the ocean, it's like, well, the economic political system becomes more important than the life of nature.
Yes.
And saying like, and often when I hear those things, I often think of John Seed with the Council of All Being, how if all that was involved in that ocean thing, those animals and that came to a decision table, how different it was. But because one system has so much power, the others lose, are discarded.
Yes, that's right. And, you know, I mean, it's another reflection of something that has characterized a lot of how the world has been working for some time, and that the whole thing of extractivism, you know, the earth and the ocean are there for us to extract what we want for ourselves, and the biodiversity goes by the wayside.
Yes. And so often it's the richer countries that are doing that because
Yes.
they've got the ability to. Are there any other questions or comments from people? Well, thanks, Jill.
Just this past week or so, the ABC program, The Pacific, has alerted us all to the potential disaster that is in the Solomon Islands, where all the war junk left over from World War II, deposited kindly by Japan and USA, is now reaching on the bottom of Iron Bottom Sound and around the islands, is reaching 80 years old. And within that junk are whole caches of oil, just waiting for the oil tanks to rust and to just spread all over the water. So that's my huge concern. But I'm interested that the ABC has a program like the Pacific running, And it was great to learn from them of this potential disastrous situation. So good on the ABC for doing that.
Yeah.
Yes, and some of the some of the items left over from the war in the ocean were because of battles, like ships that were sunk, Japanese ships that were sunk by US or Australian forces, whatever.
And
But,
planes.
in some of the places,
Mm.
they couldn't be bothered taking the stuff away when the war was over, so they just dumped it in the lagoon.
Yeah.
I can remember visiting in Micronesia, one of the Micronesian countries, and the sisters in the chapel had a statue of Mary with a pair of handcuffs. They were Mercedarian sisters. They're only that's the only place in the Pacific. They're originally from Spain. And I said, you know, did you get those handcuffs out of the lagoon, knowing how much junk was bulldozed into their lagoon? And she said, no, actually, it comes with the statue because the Mercedarians were founded for the freedom of the slaves. But that was my, you know, experience of how people are trying to deal as well with when you think how much people depend on the those parts of the ocean for their daily living, and that all that pollution goes into it, you know. Yeah.
Bill, I think the other thing that you've highlighted as for us there too is the fact that the ABC is doing that, and perhaps one of the things that an action we can take is to write to the ABC and acknowledge that and say thank you.
Every so often there is a review comes on my screen of their programs, TV or radio. So I'm waiting for the next TV one to come and to write a lengthy critique and thanks for that particular program. So yes, thanks, Anne.
That's terrific. And you can also get an email with 4 or 5 news pieces as well. That's from the Pacific ABC. Yes, that's good too.
There's another action that we would like to suggest from CCJP that I'm just going to share screen, and Mark Hinch is going to talk about it with us.
Oh, thanks, Anne, and everybody. Look, I think, I don't know about everybody else, but to hear all of those, the situations in our beautiful Pacific is quite overwhelming. And it often does lead in our first world countries to a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. How can we stop this? What climate change is so powerful and what is being done? So it often, they do tell us in psychology that one of the best ways to deal with helplessness and hopelessness is to take some action, no matter how small. So we were contacted recently by Father Aliki, who's a Maris priest at Hunters Hill, who works with and for the Tongan community there. And he let us know about this project, can you send it on, Anne, that they are doing for Tonga, with the Tongan people themselves, who are attempting to do something to help themselves with the threat they are facing of this rising seas and extreme weather impacts that's coming. And so it's so vulnerable, as so many of these atolls and other islands are, from extreme weather events, tropical cyclones, etc., increases in temperature and precipitation, that it increases the risks of drought and flood and coral bleaching. Thanks, Anne. In 2022, they suffered from a volcanic eruption that washed away entire villages. But as well, it contaminated food and drinking water, and the ferocious tsunami that waves that came destroyed entire homes and villages. There are no safe, secure spaces or purpose buildings. They can provide safe shelter for themselves or an evacuation from the district. Neither are there any appropriate gathering facilities for the villagers when these things will increasingly happen. And so what has been decided by the Tongan community there themselves, and with the help of people here in Sydney and beyond, to build a multi-purpose centre high enough and away enough with adaptable communal spaces that will provide safety during their natural disasters and to give them integrated services such as education, healthcare, and so on. And it's going to cost them $2 million, which in our terms is not a lot, but for them, of course, it is. So with Father Aliki's question to us, we in CCJP are prepared to donate to that. And if any of you who are wanting to sort of say, well, I can do this much, perhaps. I know money's not the answer. We always in the first world, we turn to money. But it is an action that we know is trying to assist our neighbours in the Pacific in Tonga. And so if you wanted to contact Father Aliki at Hunters Hill, that's his email there that you could take. We're also suggesting that he has an account for this project, and that's the information there for it if anyone was interested in doing a direct donation to the Tongan community to begin, and they themselves are raising money for it as well. So it's not just from other people, it's from the Tongans as well. That's their account number there, the ANZ, the BSB 1012468, and then the account number there as well, 163438613. Now, as well as that, we're suggesting that if people were interested and would like to join with us in doing it, we have an account in the Commonwealth Bank, and that's the information for it there. You can do a direct transfer to our account with sending Cecily your name and the amount you want and what it's for, so we can have that recorded for you. Or you could send a cheque to us at CCJP with the address there. And whatever it is that you offer would be very welcome, I think, to join with our donation, which we will send on to Father Aliki for this particular project. I think it's a sense of our solidarity with our neighbours, our brothers and sisters, who have not contributed to the terrible situation so much, but are paying the price that we have really caused in the first world. So I think we do owe some kind of reparation or restitution to enable them to do what they want to do to try to protect themselves now from the extreme weather. So you can ring Cecily at the office here at any time on Wednesday. And if you've forgotten about or you'd like to get some further information, that's something that we can perhaps do to help. Very small, but something. And it helps us with the sense of helplessness or hopelessness when we face these huge things. But with what Wendy and so many others are doing, these amazing things, it's really inspiring for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And we'll also put that information up when we get the recording up too, about where you can, if anyone wishes to add to CCJ a donation for this. Yes, it is just thinking, well, sometimes that helplessness, what can we do? What can we do? So, Wendy, thank you so much.
Just before you finish, I'm wondering whether it could be, the group could be interested to hear more from Caroline about what she was started to share with us about what, their involvement in those UN processes, either in a sharing session or something that could go on the website as well.
That'd be great, Caroline. If you wouldn't send that to our CCJP address, that'd be fabulous. We could add it to what's going to go up on our webpage about all of this.
Okay,
Thank
sure
you.
thing.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for suggesting that, Wendy. The other thing, CCJP this year has made our focus climate change in particular aspects. So we're hoping to have within a couple of months something around the health, the effects on people's health about what's happening with climate change, including here in Australia, but around the world, and then what's happening to species. So we're having the effect on so many different species. And when we hear of how many species, even within Australia, are now being affected by climate change.
Yes.
So
just one other small thing. Sorry.
Thanks, Wendy.
The UN climate negotiations are called COPs, Conference of the Parties,
Mhm.
And there's a proposal afoot that Australia would host COP31
Yes.
with the Pacific Island governments.
Mm. Mm.
So that it hasn't been formally decided, or I don't think a formal proposal has been put up, but the Pacific countries are saying, well, you know, if Australia wants to do this with us, you have to just pull up your socks and do much better than you're doing.
Yes, and we know from other countries where COP is being held, it puts a highlight on, it highlights what that country is and isn't doing.
Yes.
Yes, Mark?
Just one last thing to you, Wendy. When I was reading some of the stuff on you, someone asked you how, when you know all of this stuff, how do you keep your hope alive for our future as a human species and our planet? And you gave a beautiful answer. I don't know whether you can remember it or not.
No, I can't remember, Margaret.
What sustains you? What enables you to keep going when you see so much that seems to be so destructive of our beautiful world and our creation?
So, Mark, when we can't remember, you
Yeah.
remember, can you help remind
No.
her what it was that she said?
Well, you gave a beautiful thing about a lot of us are moving into this understanding of the divine now, the creator, and not trying to limit it to some of the very anthropocentric ideas of God sitting on clouds. And you said something about the creator knows what the creator's doing. I don't know, you said. I don't know where it's going, but I trust that out of this will come life somewhere, somehow. It was something like that. It was just beautiful.
Yes, well, that's the fundamental, and also the idea that, you know, whatever small things we do to try to bring the earth to what the creator wants, is participating in that creative action, you know. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, Wendy, that is something that very clearly you have been doing now for years. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and sharing all of your knowledge, your understanding, and also your passion for all of this. And that just comes through so strongly. So Mari started it, and I think from all of us, it's a big, big thank you for the time and the effort that you've given us this, and the information and the challenge that you've given us this afternoon.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for inviting me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you to everybody else for taking up the invitation to join us this afternoon, however and wherever you heard it from. And we hope you might join us again. And if we don't already have your email address, if you would like to if you Google Catholics and Coalition for Justice and Peace, our webpage and our email address will come up there, and that will just ensure that you'll get an email from us, or we always advertise our seminars on our webpage, and you will get an invitation through our webpage to join any seminars that we have. Thank you to the regulars, and great to see some new faces as well joining us this evening. Hopefully we'll see you all again. Bye to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Mm.